Playing to Win, Becoming the Champion. Written by David Serlin. Prologue. It cannot be found by seeking, but only seekers shall find it. A Sufi proverb. Imagine a majestic mountain nirvana of gaming. At its peak are fulfillment, fun, and even transcendence. Most people could care less about this mountain peak because they have other life issues that are more important to them and other peaks to pursue. There are a few, though, who are not at this peak, but who would be very happy there. These are the people I'm talking to with this book. Some of them don't need any help. They're on the journey. Most, though, only believe they are on that journey, but actually are not. They got stuck in a chasm at the mountain's base, a land of scrubdom. Here they are imprisoned in their own mental constructs of made-up game rules. If they could only cross this chasm, they would discover either a very boring plateau for a degenerate game, or the heavenly enchanted mountain peak for a deep game. In the former case, crossing this chasm would teach them to find a different mountain with more fulfilling rewards. In the latter case, well, they'd just be happier. Playing to win is largely the process of shedding the mental constructs that trap players in the chasm who would be happier at the mountain peak. A lot of people get rubbed the wrong way by this stuff because they think I want to apply playing to win to everyone. I don't. It's not that I think everyone should be on this particular peak or that everyone would even want to be there. There are other peaks in life, probably better ones. But those who are stuck in the chasm really should know their position and how to reach a happier place. Then there's the age-old question of how much, if any of this, applies to real life. I start out by defining the big differences between real life and games. Games are sharply defined by rules. Life is not. Exploring extreme corner cases of a game is what high-level play is about. Exploring extreme situations in life can be easily socially unacceptable, morally wrong, and illegal. Competitive games require military virtues, immediacy, emergency tactics, and at the end, winning justifies the means, as long as it's through moves the game defines as legal. Real life requires civic virtues like kindness, understanding, justice, and mercy. And yet, playing to win has valuable life lessons to teach that go beyond the scope of games. Before we're ready to talk about that, though, it's time to start winning. Beginner's Guide. Introduction. I'm here to teach you to win. Playing to win is the most important and most widely misunderstood concept in all of competitive games. The sad irony is that those who do not already understand the implications I will spell out will probably not believe them to be true at all. If I were to send this book back in time to my earlier self, even I would have trouble with it. Apparently, these concepts are something one must come to learn through experience, though I hope that at least some of you will take my word for it. Human beings, who are almost unique in having the ability to learn from the experience of others, are also remarkable for their apparent disinclination to do so. Douglas Adams in Last Chance to See. Why win at games? The great thing about competitive zero-sum games is that they offer an objective measure of your progress. When you walk the path of continuous self-improvement that a champion must walk, you have a guide. If you are able to win more, that is, more consistently defeat highly skilled players, then you are improving. If not, then not. Imagine trying to measure your success in other forms of life, such as your personal life or career. Are you improving or not? To answer that, you have to know exactly what is included within the scope of the game and what is not. What are all the factors that go into your professional life? It's very hard to answer. Even if you did have an answer and created a measure of your own progress, others would not agree on your standards. Not to say that the opinions of others is important in your measure of success, but the opinion of others does keep you honest. Left to your own definitions, you could, and perhaps subconsciously would, define the scope of your game in a contrived way so as to appear to be doing well at it or poorly at it. It would just be an exercise in determining whether you are an optimistic or a pessimistic person. Games are different. The very nature of a game is that it is a collection of rules agreed upon by all players. If players don't agree on the rules, then they are not even playing the same game. The rules define exactly what is inside the game and what is outside. The rules define which moves are legal and which moves are not. The rules define what constitutes winning, what constitutes losing, and what constitutes a draw. There's no weaseling out of defeat by redefining what the game is. The game should need no redefining, and a loss is a loss. In pursuing the path of winning, you are likely to learn that concentrating merely on beating the opponent is not enough. In the long run, you will have to improve yourself always, or you will be surpassed. The actual conflict appears to be between you and the opponent, but the best way to win is to bring to the table a mastery of playing to win and a mastery of the game at hand. These things are developed within you and are revealed to others only during conflict. You never truly know a man until you fight him. Seraph, The Matrix Reloaded. Do you want to win? Before we go on, ask yourself if you really want to win. Most people answer that they do, but they fail to consider that winning takes more than wanting. It takes commitment, extended effort, discipline, and time. It is not for everyone, nor should it be. There are a great many things to be in life other than a champion at competitive games. If your interest lies in other places, I suggest you not continue this book, as it will only upset you. Think carefully if you only say in passing that you want to win, or if you deeply desire to and are prepared to make the sacrifices required. Being a fine chef, a good mother, a doctor, a political activist, or a musician are all noble pursuits that may, due to your finite time and effort, prevent you from focusing on something as trivial as winning games. I'm not advising you to play to win, but I'm here for you if you do. There are also those who play games for something known as fun. That subject will not be covered here. I believe there is a great deal more to this fun to be had while playing to win than while only playing casually, but there is no use in entering that debate now. This fun is a subjective thing, hard to pin down, but winning is not. That's what we have on our side. Winning is clear and absolute. When you are playing to win, you have a perfectly clear goal and an objective to measure your progress. Is the master chef really the best in his field? Who can say without bias? The situation is different for the competitive gamer. Either he can consistently defeat all of his opponents, or he cannot. The principles of winning apply equally to all zero-sum competitive games. No matter the game, you must create an environment in which you can improve. You must practice against a wide range of opponents. You must free your mind from self-imposed rules that prevent you from winning. You must develop a mental toughness and the ability to read the minds of your opponent. You must interact with a community of other players, whether you play chess, tennis, Quake, Mario Kart, Street Fighter, or poker. The lessons are all the same. Gaming is a conversation. Let us look at what it is to play competitively. A competitive game to me is a debate. You argue your points with your opponent, and he argues his. Here. I think this series of moves is optimal, you say, and he retorts, not when you take this into account. Debates in real life are highly subjective, but in games, we can be absolutely sure who the winner is. The conflict is between the players. The game itself is merely the medium, the language of the debate. The game must be expressive enough to allow the debaters to articulate complex thoughts. A skilled debater knows the nuances of the language and common tricks and traps of language he can use against untested opponents. But the language is only his tool. Once he learns the theory of debate, he can apply it to any language. It is common to focus entirely on learning nuances of a language at the expense of gaining a real understanding of how debate should be conducted. Expert debates involve gaining an understanding of the opponent and what he will say, and knowing immediately what you will say back. It involves deception and boldness, risk-taking and conservatism. If you learn to debate, play to win, then learning particular languages, games, becomes simple in comparison. A few paragraphs ago, I said I would not cover the topic of fun in games, but you must learn not to be caught off guard by the unexpected, so the introduction of this book is a good place as any to throw in an early curveball. The fun of the great debate, at least to me, occurs when you push the opponent by arguing your point. Then the opponent is able to push back forcefully, yet you are able to withstand the thrust. If you can simply push the opponent over in any of a dozen ways of your choosing, there's no debate to be had. If after your simplest preliminary argument, the opponent can push you over, at least you had a taste of his prowess, but again, there was no real debate to be had. Only when you can each respond to each other's points and keep a meaningful debate going is there anything truly interesting going on. I would call this fun. Getting started. Before we get on to winning games, I want to make sure you know how to play them at all. Let's make sure you have a game, an environment in which to play it, access to opponents, and an understanding of how to gain basic proficiency. Choice of game. You first need to choose a game to play. You probably already have a game in mind, and it might not have occurred to you to try to win in other games. Different games require different skills, and it's not always clear to the beginner or even the intermediate which skills a particular game really demands. It's best, of course, to play a game you are well suited to play. I recommend a game that allows all players to start with equal materials and advantages. For example, a fighting game allows players to start with different characters, but all players are free to choose any character they like before the match begins. Magic the Gathering is a card game that allows players to bring different decks to a tournament, but assuming all players have equal access to all cards beforehand, which you must assume at the tournament level of play, then anyone could have brought any deck. But games based on leveling up a character, such as massively multiplayer games, allow one player to have a material advantage at the beginning of a match, merely because he put in more time than the other player. Seek out games that do not artificially stack the deck, but instead reward only the player's skill that one takes into a game. Don't choose every game. Although it's noble to believe you will simply play to win at all games you encounter, it's better to be realistic. Choose one or two games at most unless you have both an exceptional amount of free time and gaming skill. For example, if your focus is on a particular first-person shooter game, you might dabble with or even be expert at other games in that genre. You might also play the occasional game of Scrabble with your girlfriend, Texas Hold'em poker with the guys, and Magic Gathering here and there. To even attempt to truly win at any one of those games is a full-time job. You might not be aware of international Scrabble tournaments, the World Poker Tour, or Magic's Pro Tour, but every one of those games is a world-class following of players. Competing at a high level in just one game is a daunting task. You should recognize the level of commitment you are willing to live with for a particular game and be content with it. There are a few games I take very seriously, and the rest I simply enjoy as much as I can with my limited commitment. For example, I have read many books on chess and played chess occasionally over the years. On the whole, though, I'm a terrible player. During a game of chess, I do everything I can within the scope of the game to win, but I do very little to improve myself over the long haul. I am not a member of the chess community. I do not seek out superior chess players as mentors, and I do not even seek out the readily available wealth of opponents free to play on the internet. In a very limited way, during a particular game only, I play to win. But the whole endeavor of chess playing is an occasional fun activity for me, not a serious attempt to dominate the chess world. I'm comfortable with that because I realize I can only dominate so many worlds. Even so, I've invested quite a bit of mental resources on chess compared to other games. I used to play a few games of Boggle per week, and again, I tried to win those games, but I did absolutely nothing outside of the games to improve. I was comfortable with that because any time I might have spent improving at Boggle was better spent improving at games I took seriously. Anyway, back to choosing your game. Another factor is a game's ability to hold together at high levels of play. Many games degenerate when played at high levels of skill, and many other games only appear to degenerate but actually don't. If you choose a mature game such as chess, you can be assured of some real gameplay at high levels, but newer games are a gamble. This may seem like a minor issue now, but whether a game breaks down as you increase in skill is in fact a major issue. I would even say that the most serious players of most games will reach a point where they feel their game breaks down and no longer requires any real strategy. Often, this is when they have discovered some powerful tactic that seems to have no real counter, thus removing any strategic thought from the game. I would go so far as to say that most of the time, the player will be wrong and there will exist either counters to the tactic or far better tactics, and the game does indeed have more depth left to it. Sometimes, though, there is no more depth and the player is right. Unfortunately, this looks suspiciously like the case where the player is wrong. It will take some wisdom to know whether you should continue with a degenerate game in order to discover its further depth, or whether to abandon it in favor of a better game. This is all too much to think about now, but beware that if your competitive game of choice is not an old and mature one, you will probably face this issue. Environment. Creating an environment for yourself to play your game is vitally important. A champion is forged in fire, not in a vacuum. You need physical access to the game and access to a variety of opponents. It helps greatly to have friends who are players of the same game or to make friends who play it. If you truly walk the path of the champion, you will eventually find yourself closely involved with the community of players who play your game. The sooner you can become connected to this community, the better. They have a great deal of knowledge about the game and about tournaments and events surrounding it. You will find keepers of secret knowledge about your game, and you will find the very best players of the game as you approach the inner circles of the game's community. Having physical access to your game cannot be stressed enough. If it is a video arcade game, you must live or work or go to school near an appropriate arcade. By the time this is published, you can read about what an arcade is in a history book. If it's a PC game, you must have ready access to an internet PC. If it's poker, you must have easy access to a card house where poker is played. If your game can be played remotely over the internet, then you have the potential at least to play a wide variety of opponents, assuming you prove you are worthy to play them. If your game requires face-to-face opponents, you are well advised to live in a city where the best players of that game live if possible. If this is not possible, you must realize that the players who do have access to the elite experts of the game have an advantage over you. If you don't have access to expert players face-to-face where you live, you might consider choosing a different game to win at. Another thing you will need is a lifestyle that will allow you to devote the time, money, and mental energy to playing your game. Since this is significant, you are well advised to play a game you find fun, or at least to find fun in the competition or personal challenge of improving, because building your life around a game that feels like work is a mistake. Building your life around any game is arguably a mistake, but I pretend to ignore that point, as it sure helps when it comes to winning. Basic proficiency. Your first aim should be to learn the rules of the game, how to perform basic actions and moves in the game, to understand which legal moves are available to you, and of course, the conditions required to win and lose the game. At this stage, you should also try to learn the lingo used by other players, and you should become comfortable performing basic moves. In some games, it will take quite some time to overcome the feeling of awkwardness as a beginner. Note that none of these tasks strictly require an expert player to aid you. You can read rulebooks, FAQs, and simply play. An expert player serving as a mentor, not yet an opponent, is extremely helpful though. Either he can teach you the lingo and the basics, or if you already know this, he can explain how the game is really played. It can also be very useful to watch expert players play each other at this stage, either in person or from recordings, but playing against them directly might be overwhelming. It depends on how proficient you are in your beginner stage. Watching experts or intermediate players will also reveal bread and butter tactics that you will need to learn from, and probably a lot of other things that are over your head for now. Once you have done the above and understand the basics of the game, the next task is to learn a few bread and butter tactics of your own. You should learn effective, easy to execute sequences of moves that give you a shot at winning. The goal isn't to develop new sequences that have never been before seen. The goal is to be effective. When an opponent plays extremely poorly, you should at least have some idea about what you are supposed to do to seize the game from him. Depending on the game, there may be different bread and butter tactics to move you towards winning and to actually seal the game with a win. Also, depending on the game, you may need to practice executing these tactics outside of the chaos of a real game. If even the basic tactics require a great deal of practice, then attempt to develop these skills as quickly as possible in a controlled environment. Do not dwell too long on isolated, laboratory practicing at this point though, because you need to dive into real games. I know some players who, even at this early stage, wish to play only against expert players. I personally prefer to play against average and poor players for a bit, as a way to hone my skills of attacking efficiently. I think the important things at this stage is simply to play as much as possible, regardless of the skill of your opponents. Familiarization with the game is paramount. When you do play against experts, they will probably beat you badly. Playing them will teach you what not to do. Do this and they punish you horribly. Do that and the game is lost. Playing them will teach you which moves are unsafe or terrible, and you must learn to make fewer and fewer of these moves that will lose you the game. Of course, if all you do is remove moves from your repertoire, you are playing a safer game that is less likely to be lost at any moment, but you also must make moves to win. You should be making good progress on not losing so quickly when you play these experts, but how can you learn to win? Watch what experts do to you. They are likely extremely efficient at stealing a game. When you make a mistake, watch exactly how they punish you. Watch exactly which sequence they use to end the game. Again, Some of my friends swear by only playing against experts, and there is surely much to be learned from that. But once you have learned how the experts win, it can be very difficult to practice those maneuvers against them. The opportunity to exercise your winning muscles will show itself only rarely. It is at this point that I prefer to play against weaker players. The weaker players will present plenty of opportunities for you to practice your in-game skills. You can try variations on your attack patterns all day on them. You can hone your skills at ending a game. Often, attacking patterns will leave you vulnerable, so practice until your attack sequence leaves no gaps of vulnerability. You won't truly know if you've accomplished this until you play against the experts later, though. The idea is to use the beginners as a way to get an extraordinary amount of practice in the tactics that win the game in a short amount of time. The experts rarely allow such situations to arise, but when they do, you will need to capitalize on them professionally. When the opponent makes a fatal mistake, you need to be able to confidently take control of the game and win it. This act must be natural, something you've done 1,000 times before. When the rare opportunity to win presents itself while playing the expert, you shouldn't have to think, I'm pretty sure I can win this in theory. The textbooks say I should do X. You should take control of the game simply, quickly, and instinctively, just as you've done countless times against the beginners. The experts keep you honest. They remind you, that was not a safe move. You cannot trick me with that. That will not stop my advances. The expert also teaches you how to win, but presents only very few opportunities to practice winning. The beginner, on the other hand, will let you practice winning until it's second nature. At that time, you must return to the experts. There will soon come a time when beginners and even intermediate players are of very little use to you. They do not know how to punish your mistakes properly, so you can develop bad habits. They fall for tricks that are not real, meaning that experts could never fall for them. And perhaps worst of all, they often defeat themselves. If you play safely for long enough against beginners or intermediates, they are likely eventually to make a mistake that gives you the win. It might teach you that long, drawn-out conservative play is the road to victory. But what will you do when the expert never hands you the game? What if the opponent is good enough that you must actively beat him rather than wait for him to beat himself? This is why you must focus all of your attention on playing experts when you are ready. Intermediates Guide. So far, you have learned only obvious and mundane things. I know that taking the first step can be the hardest part of the journey, so I wanted to coddle you a little just to get you going. The coddling stops here. You must now understand the cold, hard truth of competition. This is the difficult part to accept. This is the part that will upset you. You will have many defense mechanisms that will tell you that I am wrong, but I assure you with certainty that on this point I am delivering divine truth directly to you. Introducing the scrub. The derogatory term scrub means several different things. One definition is someone, especially a game player, who is not good at something, especially a game. By this definition, we all start out as scrubs, and there is certainly no shame in that. I mean the term differently, though. A scrub is a player who is handicapped by self-imposed rules that the game knows nothing about. A scrub does not play to win. Now, everyone begins as a poor player. It takes time to learn a game to get to a point where you know what you're doing. There's a mistaken notion, though, that by merely continuing to play or learn the game, one can become a top player. In reality, the scrub has many more mental obstacles to overcome than anything actually going on during the game. The scrub has lost the game even before it starts. He's lost the game even before deciding which game to play. His problem? He does not play to win. The scrub would take great issue with this statement, for he usually believes that he is playing to win, but he is bound up by an intricate construct of fictitious rules that prevents him from ever truly competing. These made-up rules vary from game to game, of course, but the character remains constant. Let's take a fighting game off of which I've made my gaming career, Street Fighter. In Street Fighter, the scrub labels a wide variety of tactics and situations cheap. This cheapness is truly the mantra of the scrub. Performing a throw on someone is often called cheap. A throw is a special kind of move that grabs the opponent and damages him, even when the opponent is defending against all other kinds of attacks. The entire purpose of the throw is to be able to damage an opponent who sits and blocks and doesn't attack. As far as the game is concerned, throwing is an integral part of the design. It's meant to be there, yet the scrub has constructed his own set of principles in his mind that states he should be totally impervious to all attacks while blocking. The scrub thinks of blocking as a kind of magical shield that will protect him indefinitely. Why? Exploring the reasoning is futile, since the notion is ridiculous from the start. You will not see a classic scrub throw his opponent 5 times in a row, but why not? What if doing so is strategically the sequence of moves that optimizes his chances of winning? Here we've encountered our first clash. The scrub is only willing to play to win within his own made-up mental set of rules. These rules can be staggeringly arbitrary. If you beat a scrub by throwing projectiles at him, keeping your distance and preventing him from getting near you, that's cheap. If you throw him repeatedly, that's cheap too. We've covered that one. If you block for 50 seconds doing no moves, that's cheap. Nearly anything that you do that ends up making you win is a prime candidate for being called cheap. Street Fighter was just one example. I could have picked any competitive game at all. Doing one move or sequence over and over and over is a tactic close to my heart that often elicits the call of the scrub. This goes right to the heart of the matter. Why can the scrub not defeat something so obvious and telegraphed as a single move done over and over? Is he such a poor player that he can't counter that move? And if the move is, for whatever reason, extremely difficult to counter, then wouldn't I be a fool for not using that move? The first step in becoming a top player is a realization that playing to win means doing whatever most increases your chances of winning. That is true by definition of playing to win. The game knows no rules of honor or cheapness. The game only knows winning and losing. A common call of the scrub is a cry that the kind of play in which one tries to win at all costs is boring or not fun. Who knows what objective the scrub has, but we know his objective is not truly to win. Yours is. Your objective is good and right and true, and let no one tell you otherwise. You have the power to dispatch those who would tell you otherwise anyway. Simply beat them. Let's consider 2 groups of players, a group of good players and a group of scrubs. The scrubs will play for fun and not explore the extremities of the game. They won't find the most effective tactics and abuse them mercilessly. The good players will. The good players will find incredibly overpowering tactics and patterns. As they play the games more, they'll be forced to find counters to those tactics. The vast majority of tactics that at first appear unbeatable end up having counters, though they are often quite subtle and difficult to discover. Knowing the counter tactic prevents the other player from using the tactic, but he can then use a counter tactic to your counter. You are now afraid to use your counter, and the opponent can go back to sneaking in the original overpowering tactic. This concept will be covered in much more detail later. The good players are reaching higher and higher levels of play. They found the cheap stuff and abused it. They know how to stop the cheap stuff. They know how to stop the other guy from stopping it so they can keep doing it. And as is quite common in competitive games, many new tactics will later be discovered that make the original cheap tactic look wholesome and fair. Often in fighting games, one character will have something so good it's unfair. Fine, let them have that. As time goes on, it will be discovered that other characters have even more powerful and unfair tactics. Each player will attempt to steer the game in the direction of his own advantages, much how Grandmaster chess players attempt to steer opponents into situations in which their opponents are weak. Let's return to the group of scrubs. They don't know the first thing at all about the depth I've been talking about. Their argument is basically that ignorantly mashing buttons with little regard to actual strategy is more fun. Superficially, their argument does at least look valid, since often their games will be more wet and wild than games between experts, which are usually more controlled and refined. But any close examination will reveal that experts are having a great deal of this fun on a higher level than the scrub can even imagine. Throwing together some circus act of a win isn't nearly as satisfying as reading your opponent's mind to such a degree that you can counter his every move, even his every counter. Can you imagine what will happen when the 2 groups of players meet? The experts will absolutely destroy the scrubs with any number of tactics they've either never seen or never been truly forced to counter. This is because the scrubs have not been playing the same game. The experts have been playing the actual game, while the scrubs were playing their own homemade variant with restricting, unwritten rules. The scrub has still more crutches. He talks a great deal about skill, and how he has skills whereas other players, very much including the ones who beat him flat out, do not have skill. The confusion here is what skill actually is. In Street Fighter, scrubs often cling to combos as a measure of skill. A combo is a sequence of moves that is unblockable if the first move hits. Combos can be very elaborate and very difficult to pull off, but single moves can also take skill, according to the scrub. The Dragon Punch or uppercut in Street Fighter is performed by holding the joystick towards the opponent, then down, then diagonally down, and towards as the player presses a punch button. This movement must be completed within a fraction of a second, and though there is leeway, it must be executed fairly accurately. Ask any scrub and they will tell you that a dragon punch is a skill move. I once played a scrub who was actually quite good. That is, he knew the rules of the game well, he knew the character matchup well, and he knew what to do in most situations. But this web of mental rules kept him from truly playing to win. He cried cheap as I beat him with no skill moves while he performed many difficult dragon punches. He cried cheap when I threw him 5 times in a row, asking, "Is that all you know how to do? Throw?" I gave him the best advice he could ever hear. I told him, play to win, not to do difficult moves. This was a big moment in that scrub's life. He could either ignore his losses and continue living in his mental prison, or analyze why he lost, shed his rules, and reach the next level of play. I've never been to a tournament where there was a prize for the winner and another prize for the player who did many difficult moves. I've also never seen a prize for a player who played in an innovative way, though chess tournaments do sometimes have prizes for brilliancies, moves that are strokes of genius. Many scrubs have strong ties to innovation. They say, that guy didn't do anything new, so he's no good. Or, person X invented the technique and person Y just stole it. Well, person Y might be 100 times better than person X, but that doesn't seem to matter much to the scrub. When person Y wins the tournament and person X is a forgotten footnote, what will the scrub say? That person Y has no skill, of course. You can gain some standing in a gaming community by playing in an innovative way, but that should not be the ultimate goal. Innovation is merely one of the many tools that may or may not help you reach victory. The goal is to play as accidentally as possible. The goal is to win. More on losing. Losing is a part of the game. If you never lose, you are never truly tested and never forced to grow. A loss is an opportunity to learn, but losing can be upsetting and can cause emotions to take the place of logical thinking. Below are some common losing attitudes. If you find yourself saying these things, consider it a red flag. At least I have my code of honor, aka you are cheap. This is by far the most common call of the scrub, and I've already described it in detail. The loser usually takes the imagined moral high ground by sticking to his code of honor, a made-up set of personal rules that tells him which moves he can and cannot do. Of course, the rules of the game itself dictate which moves a player can and cannot make, so the code of honor is superfluous and counterproductive towards winning. This can also take the form of the loser complaining that you have broken this code of honor. He will almost always assume the entire world agrees on his code and that only the most vile social outcast would ever break his rules. It can be difficult to even reason with this kind of religious fervor some players have towards their code. This type of player is trying desperately to remain a winner in any way possible. If you catch him amidst a sea of losses, you'll notice that his code will undergo strange contortions so that he may still define himself somehow as a winner. I lost to a scrub. This is the most entertaining complaint of the bunch. When this player loses to someone he considers a weaker player, the "I lost to a scrub" line is sometimes used as an excuse. This player is saying that he is very good at the game, and losing to such a poor player doesn't prove anything. He often enumerates all the weaknesses of this poor player, including such gems as, he relies only on one tactic, and his mind games are weak. The more he puts down the other player, though, the worse he looks himself. If the other player relies only on one tactic, and you can't beat it, then what does that say about you? This need to displace blame is probably motivated by pride, but it deprives you of a chance to learn from your mistakes. And it alienates other players, a point which you may or may not care about. Basically, you need to have some respect for other players who have the power to win, no matter what faults you may see with their play styles. Sometimes these weaker players really are better than you, and you just aren't admitting it. And if they aren't better, then you should not let them win. You should be recognizing and learning from your own mistakes, or you should be improving to catch up to them. Either way, the heart of the issue lies in you, not in the player you just lost to. I suck, so why even try? This is the opposite of the above statement, underconfidence rather than overconfidence. Sometimes this line is said in sadness after a loss, which is somewhat understandable. In that case, just stick in there and keep trying. The real crime, though, is when this is said before or even during a match. A low self-esteem can be debilitating. Some players get thrown off by a past loss or other bad event in real life. They then take a losing attitude into the game, even in cases where they objectively have an advantage in a match, such as a better deck in Magic the Gathering or a favorable character matchup in a fighting game. This type of player needs to put all that out of his mind and focus on the immediate match. If you do have some advantage going into the game in your choice of character, side, deck, general play skills, or specific knowledge, then that's what you should be focusing on. And if you don't have any of that, that's all the more reason to work harder, be smarter, triumph against the odds, and show the naysayers how wrong they are. Self-doubt does not win games. Positivity does. This game is dumb, /too random, /too boring. In all fairness, sometimes a game is dumb or too random or too boring. In that case, you should stop playing it altogether and find something better to do with your time. But these claims are often made against perfectly good games. For the dumb game, there might be another level of understanding above your own that makes the game brilliant. The too random game is a bit trickier. On the one hand, the more random a game is, the worse it probably is for serious competitive play. But randomness can add fun to a game. Usually, though, there's only one meaningful way to answer this complaint. Examine whether the same players can consistently win at it. One can make a strong argument that the card game Magic the Gathering is too random, yet the same player is able to win national and international tournaments over and over. Kai Budd, the best player in the world as of this writing, routinely shows up to tournaments with the exact same deck as his teammates, yet Kai wins. Apparently, the game isn't too random. The same could be said of poker. Even though randomness plays a large part in an individual hand, the same top players emerge with the most money over the course of several tournaments. The too boring comment is always an easy way out. Basically, all these complaints are about shifting the blame over losing away from yourself and towards the supposed deficiencies in the game itself. Again, sometimes the game deserves to be criticized, but be aware that these complaints are often just excuses that allow you to shrug off a loss rather than actually learn from it. Catch yourself if you start to fall into any of these losing attitudes and take responsibility for your losses. Only the loser plays the part of the victim. The winner takes charge and actively seeks out improvement. How far should you go to win? Video games, like all software, have bugs. Even non-computerized games can have interactions the designers did not intend. If an expert does anything he can to win, then does he exploit bugs in the game? The answer is a resounding yes. The player cannot be bothered to interpret the will of the game designer as far as which moves are fair and which moves are not, or which moves are intended and which moves weren't. It's irrelevant anyway. The player knows only moves that lead to winning and moves that don't. Mysteriously, some games do expect the player to divine the will of the designer and expect them to adhere to a set of behavioral rules on top of the actual rules of the game. This is the fundamentally flawed concept embraced by most massively multiplayer online games. Consider World of Warcraft as an example. In a town, you can go on rooftops and you can fight against other players, but you can't fight other players while on rooftops or you'll receive a warning. Actually, this was totally legal before 3/11/2005 at 9:44 p.m. Pacific time, but not legal after. You can kill the same monster all day every day to farm and gain money for yourself. In fact, you practically have to. But you can't farm too much or you're labeled as a gold farmer and can be banned. If you break your line of sight with a monster, he often has trouble getting to you, which allows your friends to kill him much more easily. Smart play or grounds for suspension? Answer: grounds for suspension. If a monster is chasing you, you can go into a lake where you can't follow and wait for him to give up. Smart play or grounds for suspension? Answer: that was a smart play. The complex web of made-up rules is not unlike the shackling of self-imposed rulebook of the scrub. I'm here to tell you that legitimate competitive games are not like this. Reasonable games have built-in rules and simply do not allow illegal moves to happen in the first place. Tournaments for reasonable games sometimes have to impose extra rules, but they keep this list as clear and as short as possible. There are games that are just for fun because you can't win them or make reasonable tournaments out of them. These games, while interesting, are not within the scope of this book. So what length should a player go to in order to win? A player should use any tournament legal move available to him that maximizes his chance of winning the game. Whether certain moves or tactics should be legal in a tournament is a totally separate issue that we'll get to later. For now, the issue at hand is that if it's legal in a tournament, it's part of the game. Period. Players often fault other players for cheating or playing dishonestly when they use tactics that should not be allowed in the tournament, often because they are exploits or bugs. The player is never at fault. The player is merely trying to win with all tools available to him and should not be expected to pull his punches. Complaints should be taken up with the governing body of the tournament or the community of players as to what should be allowed in tournament. This is a dead simple issue that confuses too many players. We're going to get started, man, with another KJM Reviews. And this time we're going to be looking at Playing to Win by David Serlin. And this book goes into game theory and how to cultivate a winning mindset, right? How to cultivate the mindset of a champion. And rather than give you specifics in any one game, right? Like, it's not telling you like this is specifically how you get better at poker, this is specifically how you get better at Street Fighter, this is specifically how you become a better basketball player. It more goes into the philosophy and the mindset surrounding how to better yourself as a competitor overall, right? It talks about the do's and don'ts of what a winning mindset looks like. And I think not only does it do a good job of talking about like the game theory aspect of cultivating a winning mindset, but it also does a lot of good of just like on a day-to-day level, you know, on a personal level. There's a lot of things that I took from this that I feel like could apply to just like your everyday living, like not even necessarily discussing like trying to get better at a game, but just things that are a healthy mindset to have overall, you know. And it talks about things how like environment plays a significant role. If you're trying to like improve or get better at something, like surrounding yourself and immersing yourself in those things is how you grow and become more proficient. It talks about the significance of mindset, right? About how if you go into a situation expecting to lose, like if you enter into a game or any sort of competitive venture or really any venture at all, and you have in your head that like I suck, like this isn't going to go well, like there's no way that I can make this happen. It talks about like the self-fulfilling prophecy aspect of that, and how if you go into something with that sort of mindset, you either do things consciously or subconsciously that make you more likely to lose, you know. And I think that's a very significant thing. It talks about the scrub mindset. It's got a big section here on the scrub mindset, which I think is very useful, where like a scrub being somebody that it's not even necessarily about the person's technical skill at the game, but it's the sort of person that makes an excuse and lacks accountability, and this is the reason why they can't get better, you know. Like somebody that says, we're like, oh, I'm just bad at these games, or like, oh, you're cheap for throwing me that much, like can't you use a more skilled technique, and just like all those excuses that we've all heard from like our younger brothers and sisters or just cousins or other people that we've played, where you're like, this is what you're complaining about. And it goes into a lot of like how that's a losing mentality, you know, about how if you're losing, it's not anybody's fault outside of yourself, barring some very extreme circumstances, you know. It talks about learning to take an introspective look at what you're doing wrong, finding ways to improve, exploiting your strengths, minimizing your weaknesses, all that good stuff, man. And along with that, it talks about just like it introduces concepts from like the art of war, right? About like how to detect deception in like your opponent and everything, how to use we were talking earlier about like environment to your advantage, and just it has a lot of really, really worthwhile stuff in here, you know. I think that if you're a person that has any interest whatsoever in just like the psychological aspect of being a winner or being a champion, if you're somebody that likes to go in deeper into like the mental and the emotional aspect of game theory, you know, and like what goes into separating people who are good from bad or good to great and just things like that, then you'll get a lot out of this read, right? Because it goes into that stuff, man. It talks about how like a winner isn't only about winning games, but it's something that you adopt, you know. Like it's something that becomes a part of you. Like your habits become winning habits, your environment becomes a winning environment, your mindset is that of acceptance of responsibility, and just everything about yourself is something that you change and cultivate into becoming the champ. It's not just something that you kind of like wander into, and it's not for everybody, you know. Like, and he talks about that. He realizes that there are a million things out there in the world that are good to be, and like you do have limited time. So like trying to be the best at like a game or something like that may not be something that is for everybody, but for people that do have an interest in it, for people that have a passion in things like fighting games, like, because you know that's like my baby, right? Music and fighting games and stuff. But whatever your game of choice might be, if you are somebody that's interested in like looking into like the top level meta, or like what's going on in the head of somebody who is looking to take this seriously and become the best, might be a pretty good read for you, man. So as you guys know, I'm doing an audiobook version of this book coming up on my channel and everything. I think should be 2 parts out by the time that this comes out, if not more. But it's worth a read, man. You guys should definitely check it out. It's actually free on David Serlin's website, so you can check it out there. You know, I'm doing the audiobook. Like, you can find it on Amazon. That's where I found this, and it was like $10, man. And it's not like a super thick read or anything, you know. Like, it's not a huge number of pages, so it won't take up all your time. But I definitely think that it's worth it, man. Like, it's worth a look, because it not only provides like a good, decent analysis of what it means to get better at a game, but also to just become to cultivate the mindset of a champion in everything that you do. So definitely check it out, man. If any of the things that I talked about sounded interesting for you, then you might like it. So that being said, be good, guys. Definitely hit my YouTube buttons if you don't mind. We got the Patreon in the description for those looking to help a guy out, man. Help the channel grow, expand, help me feed the fam, help me feed myself. You're all appreciated, man. Thank you, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.